Breaking news, Sean Spicer, the press secretary for the White House, now giving an update, his regular press briefing. But as we have been telling you, there is breaking news of U.S. forces dropping a large bomb on Afghanistan. Let's listen in and see if he addresses it.
And Afghan forces in the area. The United States takes the fight against ISIS very seriously, and in order to defeat the group, we must deny them operational space, which we did. The United States took all precautions necessary to prevent civilian casualties and collateral damage as a result of the operation. Any further details, I would refer you to the Department of Defense on that. Moving on, you may know from the schedule, the President has a 2 o'clock event, so I'm going to try to keep this rather tight so the pool has an opportunity to get in and set up appropriately. Earlier today, the President signed H.J. Res. 43, bringing the total number of Congressional Review Act legislation pieces that he's signed now to 13. This resolution that he signed today overturns a regulation that was put in place by the previous administration on their way out the door that would have taken away the right of states to set their own policies and priorities for Title X family planning programs. Our federal system was set up to allow states to address the unique needs of their own populations when possible, especially when it comes to programs as important and sensitive as family planning. With the bill signing, the President has restored respect to states' rights on this particular issue. As I mentioned at the top, there's an event at 2 o'clock where the President will be meeting with the brave first responders who were involved in the I-85 bridge collapse and thank them that occurred in Atlanta, to thank them for their work and dedication in addressing this horrible situation. The bridge collapsed during rush hour on March 30th, but due to the heroic efforts of Atlanta's first responders, some of whom will be here today, no lives were lost. The President's proud to host these brave individuals and honor their commitment to protecting their community. Later this afternoon, the President will head to Florida for the Easter holiday. He will be departing Joint Base Andrews via motorcade as the preparations for the Easter egg roll are well underway on the South Lawn, preventing a Marine One departure. And while we're on the topic, I know it was brought up the other day, so just to give you a quick notes on what to expect this coming Monday. We expect more than 21,000 people to attend the Easter egg roll. The allocations of tickets have been given to schools, children's hospitals, and military and law enforcement families. Commemorative eggs will be handed out to the children who attend. Nearly 18,000 eggs were ordered, which is in line with past years. The event will start at 7:30 with different groups of guests arriving every 2 hours to ensure that all the children have an opportunity to participate in more than a dozen activities that will be available. Further logistics and guidance will be provided over the weekend. Also today, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, designated one entity and one individual connected to human rights abuses against Iranian political prisoners in Iran's prisons. The individual who is designated for his role in abuses in Iran's prison is the brother of Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's IRGC Quds Force, who was himself previously designated under terrorism, counterproliferation, and human rights authorities. The sanctions against human rights abusers in Iran's prisons come at a time when Iran continues to unjustly detain in its prison various foreigners, including U.S. citizens Si Amuk Namazi and Bakar Numazi. We join recent calls by international organizations and UN human rights experts for the immediate release of all U.S. citizens unjustly detained or missing in Iran so that they can return to their families. OFAC also designated 2 ISIS financial facilitators as an ISIS supporter in North Africa, continuing our ongoing effort to disrupt key leadership nodes for the group. Moving on, over the past few days, the President and members of the Cabinet have held many meetings and discussions with their international counterparts about the significant foreign policy challenges facing our world. Yesterday, you heard from the President himself alongside NATO Secretary General about the need for a strong funded alliance to combat terrorism, the humanitarian crisis ongoing in Syria, and many other serious threats to our collective safety and security. Also yesterday, Ambassador Nikki Haley, along with her counterparts from 9 other nations, voted in favor of a draft resolution to denounce the heinous chemical attack carried out by the Assad regime last week. Unfortunately, but not surprising, Russia stood in the way of this resolution. However, I'd like to point out that the abstention of China on the heels of President Xi's recent successful visit in Kazakhstan, a longtime Russian ally and former member of the Soviet Union. Both of these abstentions are notable and signify that the United States is persuading the world that the use of weapons of mass destruction cannot go unanswered. Secretary Tillerson, as you know, was in Russia yesterday to meet with his counterpart and ensure that they are made fully aware of the United States' positions in both areas of practical cooperation, such as defeating ISIS, and areas where Russia does not share our interests and values. As you know, the Vice President will be departing for his 10-day trip to South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, and Australia on Saturday morning. His office will be providing more information later today. Finally, I'm glad to announce that the President will host the Prime Minister of Italy for an official working visit to the White House next Thursday, April 20th. The leaders will discuss the upcoming G7, which will be hosted in Italy and Sicily, and a range of issues of mutual concern. With that, I'm glad to take some of your questions.
Sean, where is the administration on cost-sharing subsidies for insurance companies?
That is an area that is being internally discussed at this time.
Undecided?
It's not undecided. There is an ongoing discussion on that matter. Matt.
Thanks, John. The last few days have seen a number of policy shifts by the president on China as a currency manipulator, the XM Bank, the order of doing healthcare and taxes. There's more, but I won't belabor the point. What should the American people make of these shifts, and are there any policy areas that are non-negotiable?
Well, I think, respectfully, I think you can look at it at what you're referring to as a shift in a lot of ways, and by that I mean I saw a couple instances with respect to NATO being one of those shifts yesterday, and if you look at what's happened, it's those entities or individuals in some cases or issues evolving towards the president's position, and NATO in particular, he talked about the need of countries to pay their fair share, to live up to their commitments of 2% of GDP. He talked about the need for NATO to focus more on terrorism. NATO has done just that. And it is something that he pointed out in the first debate in September of last year. He talked about the fact that NATO is moving towards what he has been calling for. And I think in some cases, the issues evolve, that it's not just a clear and fast statement that the entity itself is moving towards his, or the issue is evolving towards the position that he articulated, and that can't be proven more true in the case of NATO, where he laid out two very clear positions that he had an issue with NATO, and as far back as September of last year, started to recognize that institution was moving much more towards his position. Secretary General noted that as well yesterday.
Just a quick follow-up, if I may. The XM Bank is another one. That's an institution that hasn't changed at all. So I'm wondering, on some of these other policy shifts where you haven't seen the type of change you're talking about with NATO, what should we make of those kinds of shifts? And again, are there any policy areas that are non-negotiable, that are off limits?
Well, there's always going to be. I think that there's going to be areas where I think, again, it depends on the outcome. In the case of NATO in particular, as I pointed out, it's the most illustrative. I think you look at the president's position, where he wanted to see NATO in particular evolve to, and it's moving exactly in the direction that he said it was in terms of its goals of increasing the amount of participation from other member countries, and two, is having a greater focus on terrorism, something that was reinforced by the Secretary General himself when he was here. I think when you look at these issues and you recognize the direction in which they're moving in a direction that the president stated very clearly. John.
Thank you, Sean. On the GBU-43 bomb, the first time it's ever been used, why did you choose this particular location? And would you say that this bomb won't be used again in another flashpoint around the world, like Syria, like North Korea, for instance?
Yeah, as I noted at the beginning, John, I would refer you to the Department of Defense on the specifics.
On a separate matter, you mentioned what you see as a win at the UN Security Council.
Right.
I'm curious as to why you believe this is a win. After all, this particular resolution did not pass.
Right.
You look at what's happened at the UN Security Council in the past, for instance, the Security Council resolution, which gave the green light for the Persian Gulf War, you actually had all 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council voting yes. So why are you saying this is a win when not all 5 permanent members of the Security Council actually voted yes? You had one, Russia, blocking it.
Well, I think it's very significant, China's abstention in particular. I think Kazakhstan's another one in terms of that one, in terms of its proximate location and history with Russia. You see a breakaway of Russia aligning itself with a position that is not only shared with the U.S. but the rest of the world. So that would be a natural position that they might have taken in the past. But secondly, I think China's abstention is a significant win for the president. He went down and had discussions with President Xi, and I think you all saw that, heard his remarks about how he walked through that, and I think it really shows the success of the trip, first and foremost, but secondly, it continues to show how Russia's isolated on this particular matter. That's important. So I think on a variety of fronts, it really was a huge win for the United States and for the persuasiveness of the president. John Gizzi.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. In his remarks to us off camera, OMB Director Mulvaney talked about the vision of the federal government being reorganized as, in some cases, more agencies. And he said also that the final plan will come not just from right-wing think tanks, I believe that was his phrase, coupled with the president's statement on the XM Bank. Is he already receiving any criticism or voices of disappointment from small government conservatives who backed him strongly? I refer to groups such as Americans for Tax Reform or the Cato Institute.
Well, I can't say that I've scanned every group's statements about this particular subject, but I can tell you that he's gotten a lot of very positive feedback, as well as Director Mulvaney, for their effort. As the director noted, you have a government that in large part has never been reorganized. It's just been added to. And when you look at the disparate number of agencies and programs that now flow throughout the government to do, in some cases, the very same thing, and are housed in a variety of agencies throughout the government, the question that you have to ask yourself is not only is the taxpayer getting the best bang for their buck, but are the people that those services are intended to be provided for getting the best services? So Director Mulvaney's effort at the president's direction to really look at how government is organized and operating, I think is a very significant step. And I think one of the points that he noted is that this is something that should unite conservatives and liberals and Republicans and Democrats. Good government, an effective, efficient government, is something that really doesn't have an ideological home. I think it's something that we all can agree on, that the more that we can effectively deliver for the American citizen and deliver for the American taxpayer, effective and efficient government is something that we should all probably be in line with. Richard.
Thank you, Sean. The U.S. ambassador at your Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons says that Syria uses chemical weapons abetted by Russia. Syria uses the weapon abetted by Russia's continuing efforts to bury the truth. Was the president offered proof of such truth-burying efforts by Russia?
Was he offered
Proofs of this, evidence that this is happening?
Not that I'm aware of.
No? I would like to know also, you've been putting in the same sentence Syria, Iran, and North Korea as failed state, Russia being not a failed state but part of this. Has it become to use an old expression, the axis of evil of this administration?
I think it's important to note who Russia is on the side with right now and where they stand. I think it draws a huge contrast to show who's on what side of this argument in this crisis. And I think it's important to note the difference that who they're with. And that's, I think, a very notable thing. I'm not going to go any further than to say that.
Very quick last question. With the National Hockey League playoffs just started, will the president cheer for the Rangers or the Caps?
Respectfully, that's really not been a subject that's come up too often in the White House. So I'm going to keep with our Richards and go to Richard Elliott from WSB TV in Atlanta, Georgia.
Obviously, our concern is the reconstruction of 85. We understand that the president is meeting with the first responders this afternoon, in just a few minutes, actually. We wanted to ask about the federal commitment to getting I-85 rebuilt as far as federal dollars and easing some federal regulations to get the job done quickly.
So a couple of things on that front. Immediately following the tragedy that ensued in Atlanta, the president directed the Federal Highway Administration to release $10 million. And then we have begun to work with the appropriate agencies to expedite that process. I know that there are critical repairs that have to get made, and I think that not only that the initial funding will help with that, for the roads and the bridges and the emergency access that needs to get handled. But under emergency relief efforts, there are ways to expedite some of that funding.
Press Secretary Sean Spicer only briefly addressing and confirming the breaking news of U.S. forces in Afghanistan dropping the military's largest non-nuclear bomb on an Islamic State target in Afghanistan. His message was very brief, and we're going to replay that for you because obviously this is becoming a basic press briefing by Mr. Spicer. So let's listen to it.
The United States takes the fight against ISIS very seriously, and in order to defeat the group, we must deny them operational space, which we did. The United States took all precautions necessary to prevent civilian casualties and collateral damage as a result of the operation.
Then it was back to usual with the briefing of the president's schedule. So here's what we do know about what's going on in Afghanistan. The White House says that it was the first ever combat use of the bomb known as the GBU-43, which he said contains 11 tons of explosives. The Air Force calls it the Massive Ordnance Air Blast Bomb. Based on the acronym, it has been nicknamed the mother of all bombs. The Pentagon says that the bomb was dropped on a cave complex believed to be used by Islamic State fighters in a province very close to the border of Pakistan. We do know the president has a 2 p.m. event, and perhaps we will get more information once we go to that event. So I'm sure that our crews will be watching that. Right now, we're going to take a short break from the breaking news, and we're going to give you your forecast.